you said something at the beginning, which I highlighted and I'll highlight it again, imperfect information, right? I
Mhm.
wasn't 100% sure that he was right with this advice, and I wasn't 100% sure that I would be right to take it, but I was
Right.
about 70 or 80% sure. And that has to be enough.
Welcome to the Powerhouse. I'm Josward Gonzalez, but you can call me JG. This show is for the moment before the win, when you're at the crossroads and your judgment actually matters. Each episode, I sit down with a leader here in New York City to unpack one real decision under pressure. What the stakes were, what trade offs they faced, what they chose, and the values behind it. Then we publish a short written breakdown in the Powerhouse newsletter on LinkedIn. So the lesson is easy to share, easy to remember, and useful. So if you ever had a hard call with imperfect information, this is for you. Let's get it started. Our featured leader is the managing partner of HL Ventures and CityRock Venture Partners. He is known for creating positive social change through effective leadership. He is the chairperson and founder of the Resolution Project and author of the book Strong Floor, No Ceiling. Please welcome Oliver Libby.
Thanks, JG. I appreciate it. I will note co-founder of Resolution, actually co-founder of everything I've ever started, really. So it's a good lesson for your audience. Is always best to fly in good groups. I will say just really one thing I loved about your introduction and your premise here is so much of life is making decisions with imperfect information. It's one of the things we humans can do that makes us, I think, different. And so I'm excited to have a conversation.
Awesome. To our audience, happy Ramadan Mubarak all over the world. Oliver, let's get started. So the first question, of course, is where were you right before making this big decision? Share us a bit about the context.
Yeah. So the big decision, I'm someone who always wanted to be in public service. And I always envisioned, from when I was like 4 years old, other kids wanted to be an astronaut or a firefighter, and I wanted to be a senator. And so I had always self-conceived of this notion of running for office. And I actually ended up in the federal government during college. And I thought for sure that I was going to go full time there and start a career in that world. And for reasons related to the political environment after 9/11 in the early 2000s, I ended up not staying in the national security related job that I was in. And I had this moment of decision, and I actually was leaving DC, and I was going to see my grandfather, who was a very, very big influence in my life. In fact, that's his New York Times obituary over my head here by chance. So I try and keep him close. And I wanted to ask him advice on this because I thought maybe I would go and throw my hat in the ring in some small election, some local place, and start that part of my life. And so when he said, where was I right before? I had just quit my job with no alternative prospects. I was on an Acela train and going up to see my grandfather.
So tell us the fork in your road. What were the real choices in front of you, and what did each choice mean you'd be giving up?
The choice was whether to, go try and run for some small local office and start a career. And look, in politics and in public service, there are kind of eras that go by. And so the era that I grew up in, the era of like the 1990s and the early 2000s, there was a lot of power in incumbency. So in the US political system, it's very hard to dethrone somebody who had already been elected. If you were a congressperson and you were doing a reasonably good job, it's very hard to get you out of office. And
Mm.
so when thinking about wanting to spend a life in public service, the drive early on would be like, well, get started, just get in there, tiny little local office, and then grow from there and build a whole career. If you look at the career of, like a Chuck Schumer, for example, it starts very, very early with first elected office. And so that was kind of the default move. And the advice that my grandfather gave me was to do something different. I'm happy to tell you the story, of course. But ultimately, the stakes were don't do that. Dream deferred. Like, don't actually start the thing that you really envisioned yourself doing for your whole life, because actually you won't be very good at it. And try and earn your way to being better at it. And that was very counterintuitive, and it felt like I'd be trading all of the first mover advantage and building that life of incumbency of being the person who was already there, for intangible benefit. And so it was when I first got my grandfather's advice, I was like, no, I don't want to wait. I want to get in there now. So that's kind of that. Those were the stakes for me, and obviously the stakes were, changing your whole life from a pathway that you had thought about from the earliest time to doing something totally different. In fact, we'll get to this, I'm sure, but something I was very uncomfortable with.
So you had this fork wherein you really wanted to run, this is the passion, but your grandfather, who was your hero, had that wisdom to say, build yourself first. What made this decision kind of hard for you when you were considering it?
Well, so a couple things, but maybe I'll just share with your audience the actual. So I sat with him and he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" Because I had left this job that had been mine through college, and I was really intending to go full time, and I didn't do that. And so he said, "Wow, it's a bold move. So what's next?" And I said, "Well, I think I'm just going to find some local office somewhere and try and run for it." And he was like, "All right." And I kind of sounded like, that doesn't sound like a resounding endorsement. What's wrong? And he goes, "Why, just thinking, I've had dealt with a lot of elected officials in my life. And, most of what like a good elected official isn't there because they want to be important. They're there because they want to serve. So do you want to just be important or do you want to serve?" That's what certainly kind of serve. And he said, "Great. Well, when people bring you their real life problems, when they're going to go bankrupt because of a healthcare bill, or when they need to, fire part of their company because they can't make payroll, or when they are having childcare problems or getting divorced, or they can't pay their property taxes, or they're having trouble with potholes on the street and their local school district or whatever. What life experience are you going to touch back to provide like good advice to them and or to create good laws to help them?"
Mhm.
And I was like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure I can pick it up." And he was like, "No, like you're bright, right?" Which I'm pleased that he thought that. But that's not enough to be a good servant to people and to understand where they're coming from. And the most, when people bring in their problems, part of what they want is a solution, and part of what they want is understanding and empathy, and you will have none of that. And I remember, so when the question you just asked me is what was difficult about the other side. So I kind of said, "Well, what do you think I should do then?" And he said, "Well, you should go, you've been in the public sector. You've worked on the Hill as an intern. You've been in the intelligence community for a little bit while you're in school, getting a taste of that. You should understand the engine of the country, which is its economy. You should go work in business for a little bit." And he had run a very large hospital, but a lot of his work actually was the administration and operations of the hospital, not just curing people and doing research. He was a Nobel laureate, so he had a lot of street cred, but actually, like, a lot of what he did was manage the budget and deal with his division chiefs and stuff. And so he said, go to the business world and understand what that's about, because you can't purport to be an effective public servant in this country if you have no idea where the money comes from to do any of the stuff that we do here. And I remember
Yeah.
I was like, but I have always sucked at that stuff. And that's not entirely fair to me. Like, I ran extracurricular organizations, and we talked a little bit before about, model UN conferences, which are, multi-million dollar little businesses and have team stuff. But honestly, like, I was like afraid of that stuff. And he was like, "Well, that's exactly why you need to do it. I mean, how are you going to be a public servant? You're afraid of a balance sheet." And I thought that was wise advice. And so the big brave move was to take the advice given and go do that.
Tell us more about this route that you took.
Yeah, well, so you always have to be true to yourself, though. And so for me, I think my business partner and mentor Eric Katsumemos will laugh when he hears this, but I am not a very good employee, as it turns out. Um, but I really try and be a good partner, and I'm really loyal. And I really like to build things. I built everything from as small as a college a cappella group to as big now as, a venture firm and a global nonprofit. And so I really wanted the chance to do that. Now I went to a consulting firm where I actually had the good fortune of meeting Eric, and got my basic training. But even then, it was a new consulting firm. And so they actually didn't have a lot of the training manuals and stuff. So I called around my friends who were at the big firms. It's like, "Help, brother, please give me your training material," which many of them were kind enough to do. And so, kind of partially self-trained, partially working with these really interesting people at this firm, got, smarter about business. And then basically during the global financial crisis, I had the insight that, like, the time where you want to start something is when everyone else is running for the hills. This is not new, this is Warren Buffett and all that. But I had that moment of like, all right, like, this could be a good time to start something. 26 and 27 years old when Eric and I started HL Ventures, which has now become HL Ventures, HL Studios, CityRock Venture Partners, CityRock Credit Partners, but then it was just the two of us with a shingle. And also with my college best friends started the Resolution Project, which, at the time was basically bolting like a pitch competition for social ventures on top of Model UN conferences. and eventually now has become, in about 100 countries. We've launched 1,000 enterprises. We've trained 50,000 kids a year in social enterprise. We've launched over $10 billion worth of social enterprises, and we impact millions of lives every year. And all of that from just, getting started and building a great team.
The way you told the story is that you're not a good employee, as you said. So you kind of looked for a partner and you're a very good partner. Tell us, like, what made you feel that confident to be like, I can start small and grow big versus like sticking to a big name brand and just working your way through that?
I don't know that knew that going in, but I knew that I wasn't going to be good at doing like being kind of lost in a big pond. And look, being a good partner is actually like weirdly harder and easier than it sounds. Being a good partner is being a person of
Mhm.
integrity, like doing the things you say you're going to do, staying, sticking through things and being dependable, right? Like, sure, it also, depending on what you're doing, you need to have some skills, but actually, like, what I think makes, Eric and me good partners in our firm, and what makes me and George and Howard and the team of Resolution good partners in Sounding Resolution is that we honor each other and we have stuck with. I mean, we're in it for almost 2 decades in both organizations, and we've stuck with each other. And I am very fortunate in the quality of the partners I have, and I have tried to honor that by also being a good partner in those ways. And I think those are good. If you have some of these through lines, right, JG, that like I don't know if I'm going to be good at this or not, but I'm going to do my best. I'm going to keep my word, and I'm going to stick to it until we figure it out. And honestly, that there've been many, many hiccups in the road, many, many forks in the road, as you call them. But always that's been the central connector. Like, we're just going to be honest with each other. We're going to be honorable, and we're going to stick to it.
I'll segue a bit back to the original storyline. I really want to dig deep, but we only have a few minutes of time. So when you were talking to your grandfather, he gave you that advice. You're like, oh, let me think about it. You kind of self-reflected. Take us to the moment when you made that firm decision to say, okay, I'm not going to run for a small office. I'm just going to do private. Of course, that definitely kind of took a hit on you because you had that big dream and that passion. So during that moment, take us through, immerse us through that decision that you had.
Yeah, actually, it was a question of processing the advice that I was getting and realizing the truth of it. And I think that, there's a wonderful saying. It's from Latin, but it's basically, if you want to move quickly, move slowly. And it just means kind of slowing time down. It's a little bit like the Matrix. You get the bullets coming on. And I remember like time kind of slowed down, and I was like, oh man, he's right. And I tried
Mhm.
to put myself in that. I tried to think about it because, people do, like, when you think about what elected officials do, like, yes, they try and create laws and stuff, but they really meet with constituents a lot and donors. And when thinking about like, I was like, oh, like, are they going to just be sitting across and being like, what does this kid know about anything? And when it became clear that that was going to be the case, I knew he was right. And actually, then, look, you said something at the beginning which I highlighted, and I'll highlight it again: imperfect information. Right? I
Mhm.
wasn't 100% sure that he was right with this advice, and I wasn't 100% sure that I would be right to take it, but I was
Right.
about 70 or 80% sure, and that has to be enough. And actually, as it turns out, it was very good advice for a number of reasons. Not only was it intrinsically good advice, but actually the zeitgeist of American politics has changed. So again, I'm not running for office right now, JG, but like, I will. And when I do, we're in an era now where people are mad at the incumbents. They don't want people who've been life to long politicians. They want people who understand business and have been involved in the economy and generated value and paid taxes and been in the school systems and done stuff like that. That was not super predictable. I wish I could tell you that it was that it wasn't my grandfather's advice. It was like I saw the future of American thought. No, right? It was not that, right? But it's funny how it turns out. If you make some good choices based on good things, then you get a little lucky. My grandfather used to say it's better to be lucky than good, but it's best to be both. So,
Right.
follow the good advice, then hopefully the world also joins you in that journey.
Wow. It's very insightful. When you made that decision, talk to us about the cost. What did it cost you? And for the first 30 to 9 days after making the decision, what did you learn quickly?
Well, first of all, I learned that I was utterly unprepared for applying for jobs like the ones that I thought I needed to get, and I got embarrassed pretty roundly a bunch of times. And one of the reasons I ended up at a new firm that didn't have a track record is because the old firms had no use for me, which kind of makes sense actually. I can't blame them. I'm actually friendly with some of the people who interviewed me for those jobs, and now they're like, "Oh man, I can't believe we didn't take it." I was like, "Why would you? I could barely count." I mean, Me and my college roommate Howard is going to love this because he was trying to prep me. He's always been super good at this stuff, and he was trying to prep me. As you're hopeless. So the cost initially was some embarrassment and some wading into waters that I felt deeply unprepared for, and probably because I was unprepared for them, and just had to like really. I mean, I used some network connections that I had to get a hearing, and that was what made it possible. And then the other thing is, and then this is something that's lasted. It wasn't just 30 to 90 days. It's lasted for 2 decades now, is like the feeling that I was deferring something that I really wanted to do. And I think the way that I got through that is to say, no, this is all part of that story. Like my commitment now to my investors and the companies who've invested in to see this through is part of being a complete person by the time I want to eventually run for office, right? Or be a public servant. And you don't want to do that as kind of half baked, right? And so it's all part of the story. It's all part of the experience. It's all part of what will make me good at this, hopefully. And that's how I got around it. But yeah, there's certainly been moments in time where it's like, wow, I would have. I mean, if I told my 19-year-old self that I'd be 44 and had not been in public service for 20 years, that
Right.
would be like, what were you waiting for?
It was like a shock.
Yeah.
What?
So there's always some costs.
Great. So for people who are tuning in right now, heard your story, also at the same crossroads, what rule did you use in making that decision so that they could maybe also follow that framework? How would you teach them that?
I guess the two things I would share, and by the way, I don't want to make it sound like I had these life precepts down and I was like applying a framework to the decision. That is not the case. But now, if I look back to it, there's two things. The first thing I already mentioned, which is the saying that I love in Latin, it's Festina Lente. It's if you wish to go fast, move slowly. That like slowing time. Whenever I'm in a tough situation, I always say to myself, like, all right, slow everything down, understand this, don't make a snap decision. It doesn't mean you have to be paralyzed, but it does mean like, all right, take it seriously, take in the information, make the best decision you can. The second precept though is be comfortable operating in an imperfect information environment, which is a really fancy way of saying it's okay not to be sure, right? Like
Mm.
just make the best choice. And I think the second, the like to be of that is your gut is pretty powerful. People talk about it all the time. There's all sorts of research that is way above my pay grade in terms of why this works. But I remember listening to my grandfather and like, I really, really didn't want to take his advice. I want to be like, no, dude, like I'm going to go be an alderman somewhere and people are going to love voting for me and stuff. But I was listening to him and I'm like, as I told you before, a couple of these answers, I was like, oh man, it's totally right. And like, you have to be able to say that and, listen to advice really like it's the act of listening, be like, yeah, I will take this on. This is right. So if you roll all those things together, I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this. Like, we're going to go. And then like slowed time down. We kind of understood that we're not going to have a perfect answer here, but I listened to the gut of like, oh man, he's right. And then made a decision and then you stick with it. Right.
Thank you for sharing your story. Well, there's a lot of memories about your grandfather that you shared. Wanted to see what was one sentence from your grandfather that you still hear in your head.
There's a lot. I mean, I think of him a lot. And so if I had to distill it, I mean, he had a motto. You're honestly going to think all I do is think in Latin mottos, which is not true, but he often talked about a motto, which was variously translated through hardships do you reach the stars. It's per aspera ad astra or some versions of that. And he was very clear and always saying like the road is always going to be full of obstacles and full of twists and turns and bends and things are going to go south 3 or 4 times before they happen for you. And so just remember the road to the stars is paved with, hardship and hard work. And that's always been true.
You also mentioned that 70 to 80% certainty has to be enough. What's your personal test for this, that this is enough to move?
I don't know that there is one, right? It is something you just kind of like you reach the limit of what you can reasonably know about something. Maybe that's what it is actually as I'm talking about it, JG, is it's like
Mhm.
I have expended all the resources I can of my own brain, of my resources, my network, the experts, reading, everything. I have gotten everything I can reasonably get. And I could do some unreasonable things and go get a PhD in the subject of this one decision I'm taking, but that's not a reasonable. So every reasonable thing I can to develop it right now, I have to make a call. You know who was a great practitioner of this? Actually, my grandfather certainly was, but also my mom. My mom was a renowned ultrasound doctor And she used to say she had a real knack for this, but she used to be scanning a patient and then she would say, this is what's going on with this pregnancy. And other doctors she would training would say, well, don't you want to like go back to your office and pour over the image and stuff? And she's like, yeah, I've been doing this for a long time and I kind of know what I'm looking at. And she was brave enough to make calls in a profession in medicine where actually making a call, most doctors, and I love doctors, but a lot of doctors these days, the incentive is order the next test, bring in that next opinion, get more people on the team. And it's malpractice insurance and it's, insurance reimbursements and stuff. But, my mom was brave enough to say, no, this is what's going on and you don't need anything else. I know. And she was right. you know, to an extraordinary degree. The other thing I'll quickly share with your audience is that, I think a lot about this in terms of kind of big societal problems. There's an amazing book called The Merchants of Doubt by co-authored by a really famous Harvard researcher, Naomi Oreskes. And she makes the point that a lot of the problems we have in the world, the opponents to solving that problem hit upon the very smart strategy to simply insert doubt. Is the way the cigarette companies, who, as we now know, absolutely knew that cigarettes caused cancer. But they didn't go out there and say cigarettes don't cause cancer. They tried that and it didn't work. So instead they said cigarettes might cause cancer. We don't know how much. And you really like them in the meantime. So the debate is ongoing. So let us just work this out. We're commissioning studies and stuff. And this plays out then across like our society over the last 50 years into like everything, climate change. Well, there's debate. There's disagreement. We don't need to make any drastic billion-dollar decisions in our society until we really know for sure. Well, we don't do that as individuals, right? Like we get married after dating someone for a year or two and might spend 50 years with them. We don't know everything about those 50 years. We take a new job based on a few interviews and a resume and a job posting. Like we don't need certainty about so much in our lives. Why should we need certainty about these things? So I know I just took it to the macro here, but I really think this human capacity to make decisions with imperfect information and get over doubt is one of the things that makes us a capable species. And we ought to be able to do that as a group, not just individually.
What's the most expensive time that you waited for 95% certainty?
It's a good question. I don't know that I ever made decisions with 95%. That's pretty certain. Okay. So, I'm on a GLP-1 for weight loss. And, you kind of have to be on those for the rest of your life. And so there, I waited. I got the recommendation to go on one a couple of years before I went on one. And I really wanted to see more literature. And I talked to my dad, who's also a renowned scientist and doctor. He said, look, we've been using this stuff in diabetes for a while. You should be okay. What ended up doing it for me actually was I had a conversation with my wife and she said, are you sure about this? You're going to give yourself an injection every week for whenever, right? For the rest of your life, maybe. And are you sure that that's going to be okay? And I actually said, in this case, I said, no, I'm not sure. But I'll tell you what I'm 95% sure of is that if I'm still 100 pounds overweight, that definitely kills me. And it kills me in any of 10 different ways that we know. And so actually there, the certainty was in the negative space, which is if I don't, I have an opportunity to turn this around. I don't know for sure if it's going to be okay to do the GLP-1, but I know for sure what happens if I'm 100 pounds overweight.
Wow. That's true, right? Because sometimes obesity is kind of worse than the side effect of GLP. And you did this.
And I happen to have no side effects. So, but obesity is it's the number one killer in America, right?
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I know that's deeply personal. And now we'll just go with the New York quick fire questions. Are you ready, Oliver?
Fire away.
All right. This makes it the funnest part of this podcast. So, what's your coffee order in New York?
I have two different coffee orders. I either need a latte, like simple whole milk, or I need a double espresso with cold milk on the side because I don't actually like things that are super hot. So I got to cool it down so I can drink it super fast. But I'm like a 10 coffee a day kind of guy in case the audience had figured that out.
Oh, what's your bagel order?
Everything bagel, toasted, extra cream cheese.
Perfect.
Maybe some smoked salmon, but depends on how I'm feeling.
I love lox.
Bagel with cream cheese is like my jam.
What's a local spot that deserves more attention?
Oh my God, we're in New York. I mean, it's like everything deserves more attention. And there's a great little coffee shop that's like very close to where I live called Frame. Really good coffee. It's cool because actually they really try not to have you work in the coffee shop, which is like at times a little annoying, but actually kind of a cool vibe.
Mm.
It's cool because on one wall there's only frames and on the other wall there's only cameras. It's like the decor, so it's like the whole thing. It's cool. But the coffee's really good. So framed coffee.
So you're celebrating a big occasion. Let's say you're inviting 10 people, over 10. Where are you booking?
Well, these days it's like a play date because we are always with the kids. I think it's probably Bluey's house
Mhm.
for a birthday party. Fits for me. I mean, I really, really love, there's a kind of a speakeasy type place on Irving Place called Dear Irving, which is like a big favorite of mine. I love that.
Mhm.
We're going to have like a night out without the kids, Dear Irving.
Awesome. I love that. So, what subway behavior should be illegal?
Well, should be illegal. That isn't.
Maybe, yeah.
Subway should be, it is illegal. That's a really good question, JG. I mean, I think the problem is really enforcement. Like there's a lot of things that are illegal that just happen. So I'm going to stick with if people just followed the law and they enforced the law, then we'd be much better off now.
Got it. Which neighborhood is basically your personality and why?
Man, my wife is going to kill me. I lived in Midtown Manhattan for 20 years, and
Mhm.
Midtown is like, it's funny because you don't think of Midtown as this place that's like all business, right? Except for the fact that no, it's super residential. Oh, and it also has Broadway and Times Square and Bryant Park, and it also has like amazing restaurants if you know where to find them. So that's kind of, I'm like Midtown. I'm like I look like I'm all business, but actually there's a lot of fun stuff going on. Like I'm a beatboxer, I love to sing and stuff like that, and
Mhm.
like things that you wouldn't tell. So like Midtown, I'm hidden many layers.
Love it. Love it. What's one place you'd take a friend from out of town?
When I take a friend from out of town, the the top of Rockefeller Center. I've heard it, and this is a little, so my one of my uh, companies within HL Ventures is CityRock Venture Partners. We called it CityRock because we've been in Rockefeller Center for my whole career, uh,
Mm.
sector, and we worked in 30 Rock for many years. And that view, like if you type in like view of Manhattan from high building, you're like 90% sure to be getting the view from 30 Rock. It's an incredible. I mean, it's like the most basic thing, but it's like it never gets old.
I love it. If New York had a signature scent, what is it?
New York had a signature scent of this kind of there's that like street scent that's like hard to, the street scent, which is actually like things that kind of waft by you. It'll be like the pile of trash that's outside the building, followed immediately by like the street meat and coffee, joint that's on the corner, the
Mm.
trailer, right? The cart, which like intermingles with like, a dog that's walking by. I mean, I think that's New York. It's like when if you happen to be in the country, like it's like all the scent of the pine. In New York, it's like all this like a kind of assault on the senses, which I love.
Great description. So finish this sentence. In New York, you can blank.
I'm going to dispense with all the like basic stuff about you can be anything, do anything. In New York, you can build. Actually, right up behind me, there is the obviously New York. I'm on the board of Tech NYC. We're big believers in the fact that startup economy in New York is the strongest in the world. But yeah, I've built all my, I built my business, my nonprofit investments, et cetera, all here in New York. In New York, you can build.
Love that. What's the most New York thing that you've done?
The most New York thing that I've done.
Mm.
But the most New York thing that I've done is like going to the park, on the Upper East Side with my son, stuffing bagels in our face and running around, with the sense of New York attacking my nose, that's like life in the city, grabbing
Perfect.
food, hanging out. Yeah.
Okay, last question. What did New York teach you?
What did
New York teach you?
New York is a constant teacher. Um, and in some of the most unexpected ways. I think you should never be closed off to learning about things in the city. I mean, New York teaches culture, it teaches languages, it teaches effort, it teaches aspiration. There are beacons of achievement here that you can follow, if you can make it here, right? All that stuff. I think the main thing about New York is New York kind of proves that there's no limits. I wrote this book, Strong Floor, No Ceilings, and in a city of some of the tallest buildings in the world, and certainly one of the densest, populations, that there is no ceiling to what you can achieve if you work hard here in the city. It doesn't mean everyone has access, and I think we need to do a lot more to make sure
Mhm.
everyone can. But yeah, there is no upper bound here in New York, and that's been a big blessing.
So, Oliver, thank you for joining us. I will give you the floor for your final remarks. And where can they find you? Maybe your book and things that you're doing in the near future.
Well, JG, thanks. I really appreciate it. I hope this was helpful to folks. I think being able to slow time down and listen to your gut and hear good advice from people is a superpower if you can do it. And sometimes you have to wait to do the things you want to do because you want to do them right. And yeah, if you want to follow me, I mean, I have oliverlibby.com. I'm on a bunch of different social medias. And then, yes, of course, strongfloornoceiling.us. Buy the book, check it out. It's a vision for America that has a lot of these principles baked into it. So I really hope that you enjoy it. And thank you so much for the time here.
Thank you for joining us, and to our audience. Hope you enjoyed this podcast just like I did. And we'll see you in the next episode.